The birth of civilization before the pharaohs. Long before the pyramids rose from the desert sand, before the first king placed a crown upon his head, the Nile was already shaping a civilization. 10,000 years ago, the people of the Nile Valley were nomads. They followed the rains, hunted the game, and gathered what the land gave freely. But the land was changing. The great green savannas of North Africa were drying out, transforming into what we now call the Sahara. As the desert crept inward, people were pushed toward one source of life that never failed: the Nile River. The Nile was not simply a river. It was a clock, a calendar.
Narmer, the first pharaoh. His name was Narmer, and with a single military campaign, he united the two kingdoms of Egypt into one, creating the world's first nation-state. We know of Narmer primarily through a ceremonial object discovered in 1898 near the ancient city of Hierakonpolis, the Narmer Palette. Carved from a single slab of siltstone, this artifact shows a king in the tall white crown of Upper Egypt striking down a northern enemy, while on the reverse side, the same king wears the red crown of Lower Egypt, surveying rows of decapitated bodies. The message is unambiguous. One man now rules both kingdoms. With unification came the need for administration, a way to track grain, record taxes, organize labor across hundreds of miles of territory. And so, Egypt invented writing. Not poetry, not philosophy. The first hieroglyphs were receipts, accounts of who owned what, who owed what, and who had paid. From the very beginning, the Egyptian state was a machine for organizing
The Old Kingdom, the age of pyramids. For 500 years after Narmer, Egypt grew in power, sophistication, and ambition. Then, in the Third Dynasty, a pharaoh named Djoser asked his chief architect a question that would change the world. Can we build something that lasts forever? His architect, Imhotep, answered with stone. Not the mud brick that Egyptians had used to build before, but cut limestone, stacked in a series of stepped terraces rising 62 meters above the desert at Saqqara. The Step Pyramid was the first large structure of cut stone in human history. It was a revolution in engineering and in theology. The pharaoh, elevated on a mountain of stone, could be seen ascending to the gods. But Imhotep's Step Pyramid was merely the beginning. 50 years later, under the pharaoh Sneferu, Egyptian engineers began to dream of something smoother, steeper, purer. Sneferu built 3 pyramids in his lifetime, each one a refinement of the last. The Bent Pyramid, whose angle famously shifts midway through construction, reveals the trial and error that lay behind Egypt's greatest achievements. The Red Pyramid, completed shortly after, was the first true smooth-sided gods, priests, and the invisible world. To understand ancient Egypt, you must understand what Egyptians believed stood between them and chaos. They called it Ma'at, a concept that encompassed truth, balance, justice, and cosmic order. Ma'at was not merely an idea. It was a goddess, and she held a feather. When you died, your heart was weighed against her feather on a great scale in the Hall of Two Truths. If your heart was lighter than the feather, if you had lived a just life, spoken truth, honored the gods, treated your neighbors fairly, you passed into the eternal paradise of the Field of Reeds. If your heart was heavy with sin, a monstrous creature called Amet, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, devoured it, and you ceased to exist entirely. This belief shaped everything. Egyptian art, architecture, law, medicine, agriculture, and politics were all organized around one central project: maintaining Ma'at, keeping the universe in balance. At the center of this cosmic maintenance stood the pharaoh. He was not simply a king. He was a living god, the earthly manifestation of Horus, son of Osiris, representative of the divine order. When the pharaoh performed rituals, gods, priests, and the invisible world. To understand ancient Egypt, you must understand what Egyptians believed stood between them and chaos. They called it Ma'at, a concept that encompassed truth, balance, justice, and cosmic order. Ma'at was not merely an idea, it was a goddess, and she held a feather. When you died, your heart was weighed against her feather on a great scale in the Hall of Two Truths. If your heart was lighter than the feather, if you had lived a just life, spoken truth, honored the gods, treated your neighbors fairly, you passed into the eternal paradise of the field of reeds. If your heart was heavy with sin, a monstrous creature called Amet, part lion, part hippopotamus, part crocodile, devoured it, and you ceased to exist entirely. This belief shaped everything: Egyptian art, architecture, law, medicine, agriculture, and politics were all organized around one central project: maintaining Ma'at, keeping the universe in balance. At the center of this cosmic maintenance stood the pharaoh. He was not simply a king, he was a living god, the earthly manifestation of Horus, son of Osiris, representative of the divine order. When the pharaoh performed rituals, Ramesses the Great, the pharaoh of pharaohs. Among the hundreds of pharaohs who ruled Egypt across 3,000 years, one name towers above the rest: Ramesses II. Known to history as Ramesses the Great, he ruled for 66 years, from 1279 to 1213 BCE, longer than almost any monarch in recorded history. He built more temples, erected more statues, fathered more children, and fought more battles than any pharaoh before or after him. He was Egypt's greatest self-promoter, and arguably its greatest leader. At the age of 25, he led Egyptian forces against the Hittite Empire at the Battle of Kadesh in Syria, one of the earliest battles for which detailed tactical accounts survive. Caught in an ambush by Hittite chariots, his army surrounded, and his position nearly overrun, Ramesses personally led a countercharge that prevented total disaster. The battle ended in a stalemate, but Ramesses returned to Egypt and had the story carved on temple walls across the country, depicted as a solitary god of war, single-handedly repelling thousands of enemies. It was propaganda of the highest order, and it worked. 16 years later, Ramesses and the Hittite king Hattusili III signed what is now recognized as the world's first known peace treaty, a document that established non-aggression, mutual defense, and the extradition of refugees. A copy of this treaty hangs today in the United Nations headquarters in New York. Ramesses built temples at Abu Simbel, at Abydos, at Karnak. At Abu Simbel, he ordered 4 colossal statues of himself, each 20 meters tall, carved directly into a cliff face overlooking the Nile.
Cleopatra, the last pharaoh. More than 1,000 years after Ramesses the Great, Egypt still stood, but the world around it had changed beyond recognition. Alexander the Great had conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. After his death, one of his generals, Ptolemy, seized Egypt and founded a dynasty that would rule for 3 centuries. The Ptolemies were Macedonian Greeks, but they were shrewd enough to adopt Egyptian religion, build Egyptian temples, and present themselves as legitimate pharaohs. The last of them was Cleopatra VII. Born in 69 BCE, she was the first member of her dynasty to actually learn to speak Egyptian. She also spoke Greek, Latin, Ethiopian, Hebrew, Aramaic, and several other languages. She was not merely a beauty. She was a political genius operating in one of the most dangerous environments in history, the dying days of the Roman Republic, with 2 of Rome's most powerful men competing for dominance of the entire Mediterranean world. She allied herself first with Julius Caesar, and later